Welcome to the podcast of Clearview Church. We believe seeing Jesus changes everything and everyone. We hope you enjoy this week's message.
Good morning, church. I'm going to grab one of these stands back here. It is so good to be with you today. My name is Olivia Knapp, and like Abigail said, better known as Miss Liv. I am the children's minister here at Clearview. I just started my position actually the end of June. So this is my brand new church home, and I'm just so blessed to be here at Clearview. You all have been so hospitable and loving and compassionate as I've made my transition into ministry. Today I want to tell the story of 3 different women. So I'll start with a story that I heard a really long time ago. This story is about a girl from my hometown, and for the purposes of today, we'll call her Mary. So Mary was raised in the church, in every sense of the word. Her parents were longtime members. She participated in youth group activities, and she even volunteered as a youth leader after she graduated. Mary did all the things someone who is raised in the church is supposed to do. And it was a really big part of her life until her later teen years, when she found herself only 20, not married, and pregnant. And after she found out the news, it didn't really take long for this 20-year-old girl to make her first ever parenting decision. She was going to raise her baby in the church. So, naturally, Mary went back to her home congregation to attend and to be involved in church life once more. But after her return, the congregational members very quickly caught on to her situation. And it wasn't long before the lead pastor was asked to have a conversation with Mary. Pastor visited the home of Mary's parents, and he sat across from her in the living room and informed her that she was no longer welcome at her congregation. He told her that she was not allowed to come back to church because the young students in the youth group looked up to her, and their parents just couldn't allow such an example for their children. So, with not much left to say, he left, and without much other choice, Mary left the church that raised her. A few centuries prior to this story, there is another woman in the Gospel of John, chapter 8, and I'm going to read that for us today. It starts, "But Jesus went up to the Mount of Olives, and at sunrise, he arrived again in the temple courtyard. All the people gathered around him there, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman. She had been caught in committing adultery, and they made her stand in front of the whole group. They said to Jesus, 'Teacher, this woman was caught sleeping with a man who was not her husband. In the law, Moses commanded us to kill such women by throwing stones at them. Now what do you say?' They were trying to trap Jesus with that question. They wanted to have a reason to bring charges against him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. They kept asking him questions, so he stood up and said to them, 'Has any one of you not sinned? Then you be the first to throw the stone at her.' And he bent down again and wrote on the ground. Those who heard what he said began to go away. They left one at a time, the older ones first. Soon, only Jesus was left. The woman was still standing there. Jesus stood up and asked her, 'Woman, where are they? "Hasn't anyone found you guilty?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then I don't find you guilty either," Jesus said. "Now go and leave your life of sin." So in this story of Jesus' ministry, the Pharisees are doing anything possible to trap Jesus in his own words in order that they might have grounds to arrest him. This is a common theme throughout the gospel. Their question to Jesus is, what will be good enough to put this sinner back into God's family? What sort of penance or what sort of price does this woman have to pay in order to be back in God's good graces? Now, there's not a lot of detail given about this woman in John, and we don't even know her name. All we know is that the Pharisees are using her to try and prove a point. They're not viewing her as a human in this moment, as they throw her in front of Jesus in all of her shame. There's no regard for her personhood because she's just the bait in their trap. So just imagine with me for a moment what this woman's life might have been like leading up to this point. So presumably this woman is Jewish, one of God's chosen people, otherwise maybe the Pharisees wouldn't have this kind of jurisdiction over her. And we can also imagine that maybe all of this is happening like right in her neighborhood. Like she's being humiliated in front of all of her community. Maybe her neighbors know about her life. Maybe they're shocked in this moment. But just sit with that feeling that she's having right now. In a crowd of people who she knows and lives with, this woman is completely alone. And not only that, she's facing fear for her actual life. She's hearing from the Pharisees that they intend to stone her for what she's done. And she's imagining that even if she does escape this violent consequence of her sin, her life will never be the same. She'll be outcast forever, followed by rumors, isolated by her situation. No matter what, there will be no redemption for her. What the Pharisees and the scribes in this story are doing is further driving the wedge between them and her. They're assuming that the only way that they can be presumed as righteous is if this woman is condemned. And maybe not to this extreme, but have any of us been guilty of that thinking? Like, have any of us ever been guilty of saying, well, at least I'm not doing as bad as that person, right? Like, at least I'm not doing what that person is doing. Like, I have to be on some sort of right track because of that. We tend to place people, and I've been guilty of this, in this other category in order to soothe our own worry and fear about what we're doing in our own life. So the Pharisees are looking for Jesus' response to this. Is the one who claims to be the Son of God, the most perfect one, going to follow the law of Moses and condemn this woman? Because shouldn't he who claims to be sinless be the first person to condemn her? But Jesus, the friend of sinners, responds to the Pharisees and the scribes in a way that's truly stumped all the super smart people who study the Bible. He says nothing. Instead, he bends down and starts to write in the sand. And like I said, even the scholars who study these ancient texts, can't really figure out what's being written. Like, no one has any idea. But I think that it's probably not all that important what Jesus wrote. He could have been writing nothing at all. What is important is that when Jesus bends down to write, all the attention moves from the woman who's caught in her shame to Jesus. And Jesus is a shield for this woman without even saying a word. And this image just perfectly illustrates what Jesus came here to do. He is the one who pulls us out of danger and places that burden on himself. He writes as the Pharisees and scribes continue to repeat their demands until Jesus finally says to them, all right, you can have your way. Go ahead and stone her. However, let the person here who has never sinned be the first one to throw the stone. And silence falls over the whole crowd. The air is so tense that you could cut it with a knife, and no one moves. You can almost hear the woman just trembling at the pronouncement of this decree. Jesus continues to write very calmly. He keeps doing so until he hears footsteps, one by one, slowly turning to leave. The oldest first, until the youngest one there had left. And when everyone had gone, Jesus stands up and looks upon the woman. It's just the two of them left. I just always imagine Jesus so tenderly looking at her as he asks, "Woman, where are they? Has anyone found you guilty?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then I don't find you guilty either," Jesus said. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Jesus, in this moment, says yes to this woman being fully loved by God and included in his family when all others wanted to cast her aside. So at the outset of these two stories that I've told, they look very similar. Both Mary in the first story and the woman in the story with Jesus are on the outside of the community of faith with no hope of re-entering. Their life circumstances have brought them to a point where everyone is telling them that they will never again be accepted by God. Except for Jesus. Except for Jesus. Jesus acts with mercy and justice to bring all into the family of God. He does this to demonstrate his immense love for us, but also so that we as the church know how to react when we encounter those who are other from us. And this is the example we are to follow as the hands and the feet of Christ in the world. We are to shield the vulnerable and include the outsider. And maybe you can relate to what this woman is experiencing. If you've ever felt isolated from a community of faith because of who you are or what your circumstances are, if so, then this story is good news for you. This story means that there's nothing you can do that will put you outside of God's mercy. He bends down in the dirt, ready to take the stones that are meant for your back. And when all your accusers are gone, he holds your head in his hand and commissions you to live as a person who is redeemed and freed from the weight of sin. And on the other side, maybe some of us are guilty of thinking like the Pharisees. If our idea of religion has put us further from those in need and those who God calls us to love. And maybe we struggle to hold the tension of correcting in love and welcoming without hesitation. It can be a really hard ask. But Jesus shows us redemption for both. So, some of you may know that I come from a big old family. I'm the oldest of 8 kids. And when I was 16, my family was blessed with a foster placement of 2 sisters. And it turned our world upside down, like in some unimaginable ways. And some of us in our church have gone through similar processes or have been like the support or the close friends of those serving in foster care. So you kind of know what this transition is like. And I remember one night, a few months after my sisters had moved into our house, I was rocking my youngest sister to sleep. She was about 6 months old at the time. And I looked into the face of this sweet, sleeping baby. And I just had one of those moments of profound wonder, it felt like, where I felt like God was revealing to me, this is what my love is all about. I came and bore the weight of the cross so that you could understand the infinite love that I have for you. And your job now is to show this little one the way to that love. Show it to her by always giving her somewhere safe to land, where she knows that the arms of love are just going to scoop her up and lead her back to me. And as I've gotten older, I now recognize that moment in my life as my call to ministry. And once again, I feel so blessed to be able to do exactly what God told me to do in that moment here at Clearview. I want to go back to the very first story I told about my friend Mary. So after Mary was asked to leave the church, she was still really determined to raise her child in a church environment, which is incredibly brave. So she accepted an invitation from one of her friends to attend a Sunday morning service. And that day, Mary walked to the front of the church, told the whole congregation her story. And what she found out later was that that friend who had asked her to church had asked the women of that church to be praying for Mary before she even stepped foot through the doors. So what Mary will tell you is that the day she came into that church, it felt like family. That congregation threw her a baby shower. Mary was proposed to in front of that congregation, and she raised her other 7 children in that church and continues to do so to this day. And the redemptive part of this story is that there was no kind of price Mary had to pay to gain this love. right? There was no fear of a law or a social expectation that would keep her from being a full member of the church family. This church recognized their responsibility was to enact mercy and let God take care of the rest. So I have a little bit of a confession to make here. I am a little bit closer to this story of Mary than I've let on. So Mary's real name is actually Cindy, and her baby in this story is actually me. And I know that my mom is one of the bravest people on this planet, because I think if I was asked to leave my home church like she was, I think I would have walked away from God altogether. But the redeeming love of Jesus, through a group of people who were willing to accept whatever child of God landed on their doorstep, changed my family's life. And it changed my life. So that church became our family. My aunts, uncles, and cousins were people I wasn't related to by blood. But they were the ones who faithfully showed up in our lives. And they made it a point to love my family like Jesus does. Because we were seen as part of them. We were seen as part of God's family. And therefore part of the church's family. And that is the yes that I'm asking us to respond to today and with this sermon series. The yes that Jesus gave to the woman in the story. And this may seem like an obvious response for us as Christians, right? Like the number one thing you should be doing as a Christ follower is loving others, right? Like it's kind of the textbook answer. And it's easy for us to say that, but the challenge is structuring our lives and our church here at Clearview in a way that lives that with everything that we are. We don't become the church that Jesus wants for us by living in our own little corner of the world here at LSUS, right? And just assuming that we're going to have this loving reaction when these situations are presented. No, just like something that is muscle memory or a habit, it's something that we form, and it's something that we practice in our everyday life. And I really want to encourage us here as a body today by saying that there are so many ways I see us living and practicing exactly what the gospel is here at Clearview. I mean, just yesterday, right? When we gathered as a church and we poured our time and our resources and our money into service that benefits a whole community. That's just one small example of that. I get to see it up close and personal in the way that all my wonderful, beautiful KidsView volunteers tirelessly welcome the youngest, most vulnerable members of our church into worship and into learning about God. It's something that's in our DNA. And it's only going to be multiplied the more we lean into this call. Because Jesus' yes is also our yes. It is saying yes to the personhood of all God's people, young and old, outcast, esteemed, rich and poor. It's saying yes to each person in our church being a part of God's family. saying yes to heaven here on earth. My mom experienced the worst of what church can be. But she also experienced it at its best. The woman in John 8 came up against the worst of religion, when people being right was more important than her own life. But she also experienced firsthand the incredible mercy of Jesus shielding her from danger and redeeming her life. And my baby sister, even though her life began in a difficult situation, she's been the completion of our family. And her life, even as the tiniest baby, was the conduit through which others experienced the gospel. So this is why I say yes to church. And I say yes to church as my family. And I hope that you're going to say yes to church too, because it can make all the difference. Let's pray. God, we are so grateful that you are there in our moments of brokenness and pain and hurt, and that you shield us with your love and your compassion. We're so grateful that you have called us as Clearview to be a church who enacts this mercy, who enacts this compassion, and lives to enact heaven here on earth. I'm so grateful for the love that you have shown me and shown to each and every person here in our church community. God, may we take that love out into the world and say yes to your people. We love you so much. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Thanks for listening. If this was meaningful to you, subscribe. Find out more about us at clearview.church, or, best of all, join us in person. We worship Sundays at 10 a.m. on the campus of LSU Shreveport.